So welcome tonight to the Wachusett Regional School District Management Subcommittee. Tonight, Thursday, February 11th, 2021, right now at 6:32 p.m. This meeting is being conducted remotely using Google Meets per Governor Baker's orders last March. So the first thing on our agenda tonight is this call to order. I did want to just take a few moments and have a few opening remarks before we go into our full meeting tonight. I did want to express some disappointment in how Monday's meeting ended in the middle of a presentation and a discussion. I think that's something maybe we can brainstorm together this evening. If we want to call meetings to be shorter and to end at a certain hour, that's certainly something we can look into. Members always have the opportunity, if they're tired or have other responsibilities, to drop off of meetings. But I know Kenichi and Kate specifically wrote to me saying that they had important things to say, and the meeting was adjourned before discussion was ended. So I just want to make sure, you know, all of us have opinions, except for me. I don't get to have one. You know, and if we're speaking during the meeting, then we need to allow those who haven't spoken the chance to speak. It was just really disappointing for me to see a presentation that we had begged for 3 months be cut off early because it was getting late. So as a school committee, if we're going to beg someone to do something, we have to let their presentation at least be completed. So it was just a disappointing night for me. I went to bed very upset, woke up very upset. Tried to get a special meeting call so that we could finish our meeting, and couldn't really find a date with the impending vacation. But I think we can do better. So there's my mama 2 cents. I'll get off my pedestal now. Soapbox, the thing that I'm standing on. So first thing on our agenda tonight are the approval of our December 15th meeting minutes. Yes, we have not met in 2 months. Is there a motion on the floor?
So moved.
Been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any changes needed to the meeting minutes? Seeing none, go to a roll call vote. Member Brown, you're right next to me.
Brown, yes.
Member Mills?
Mills, yes.
Member Smith?
Smith, yes.
And Member Dennis, please.
Abstain.
Okay, thank you. Next on our agenda tonight are subcommittee reports. Let's just go around in the same order. Scott, what's going on with legal and where are you going?
Well, we have the nurses now to negotiate, and so I'm going to hold a legal affairs meeting coming up after vacation to find out who's going to be sitting in on these negotiations. So we have the nurses. The WREA sent us a letter saying they do want to officially open and start negotiating. And so we just finished the MOA that we voted on last meeting. So we need to start that process. And then we have to pivot from the paraprofessionals MOA. Ken, their negotiator, reached out and said he's getting very frustrated with the MOA negotiating, and they were waiting for the MOA for the WREA, and they basically said, let's forget about that. Let's start negotiating on their regular contract. So we have those 3 that we have to look forward to. So, and then what will happen is in legal, we'll go into executive session. We'll have the administration. We'll go over how we want to bargain, what we want to see. And then the next management subcommittee, I'll ask you, Chair Weeks, to if we can go into executive session and strategize as management.
Thanks. I guess just a clarifying question. So you said the MOA for the paras, they're just forgetting about it and just going as normal?
Yeah, the email we received from Ken Bergen, he felt very frustrated, and so he said, let's put this aside and let's move on with regular negotiation.
Okay.
Because if you remember, I mean, they were evergreened, and
right.
So normally when you evergreen, you don't have a COLA. And so part of the process, if we do come to an agreement, they would go proactive. Say we negotiate a 2% COLA, they would go back. And I think that's kind of what they're looking at. And so, and again, I can't get into it in public session, but when we're in executive session, I'll go in further why I believe that's the case.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for doing everything to wrap up all those negotiations, a few things off your plate. So it's a good thing.
I just have a question because I'm doing the notes and I got lost for a minute. Is it the three that are up are WREA, the paraprofessionals, and the nurses? Was that the other one?
That is correct. We agreed, we voted on the WAA, the Administration Association, and so we voted on that, and so that has been done. And the nurses are the new one.
So the are the teachers up as well? Are you starting to work on them? Okay, so I didn't. Okay.
Yep. And so their contract is up in June, and so I got to be careful what I say, but it's.
I've got enough for the notes. I've got it.
Yeah. So again, our next meeting, we should go into executive session. I'll discuss that. So.
Just, if you don't mind me, just two quick observations from last time in terms of process. It was not our finest moment when we voted down a teacher ratified contract. So I suggest that whatever process we do this time, that we maybe let the committee know a little bit more about the details of what's happening before the teachers ratify, so that we don't reinvent that horrible night.
You're talking about the last contract, correct?
Yeah.
Like 3 years ago.
Yeah, the 3 year ago contract, right? And,
right. No, I hopefully since then with the MOA, I hope everybody that I've been trying to go into executive session as much as possible to bring us up to speed with the MOA, and I'm a big believer in that. So that will happen. I just hate to. I don't want to burden the full committee going into executive session with our attorneys if they don't see any value in that. But if you guys,
and that was totally my fault, through you. I'm not saying that was the committee's fault. I'm just saying we want to avoid that.
Oh no, I agree. And there's legal stuff on when people's like, oh, can we have view the contract a week before or something? I'm getting legal advice saying that that's not a good idea. So I fully understand that, but in this world of being virtual, they decided that it would be best to put it up on the screen and go over everything that night.
I think, to reiterate Ken's point, I think the last time we did that contract was 2 years ago, because we're coming up now on the end of the third year. We're trying to do that a little bit in advance, but the last few votes, even the MOU was ratified in advance, and I think that given the closeness or relative closeness of some of the votes that have been taking place on some of these things, it seems to me that there's a strong desire amongst many committee members to be more plugged into the details as time goes on. Maybe even more so than we currently are. Sure.
Nope, I'll be more than happy. I'll keep telling Chair Weeks to keep putting that executive agenda on. So
to make it happen, that's easy.
Yeah. And the attorneys both asked Joe Bartulis and Naomi to have the executive session in the beginning, because they would have to sit on a meeting, and some of our meetings go very late. So.
And then we're also paying for them to sit around.
Yeah. So.
Which I'm not in favor of. So. Thank you, Scott. Any other questions for Scott in legal?
I just make a comment, not a question, but just about the fact that meetings go late and the executive session portion. It might be that we need to separate out sometimes that it's an executive session meeting, because that was really long on Monday, and I know you just kind of chastised us for that, but it was 5:30 to whatever time. It's just, that's a lot for people to be sitting. You don't even have the option of getting up like at the meetings and standing and stretching and going to the library, in the library. So if you really want our focus, which we all want to give, we probably really need to not have our attention divided so much and trying to
That's a good
accomplish
idea.
so much.
That's
So.
not a bad idea, Scott. When we have big things, if we had a meeting just for those e-sessions. I like that, Christina. Thank you. That's a really good suggestion. Thank you. Ken, your turn.
Well, unless this committee is going to assign our committee work, the moment that we're at is we're meeting in March to discuss what we would do in the summer for the 360. There are certain members of the full committee who wanted us to move that faster, but that both this committee and the subcommittee didn't want that. So I was saying, unless we're given something else, all we're doing is meeting in mid-March.
Okay, so can just update me a little bit on where the 360 process is and where you see it going, like in your vision, right? In a perfect world, how does that process kind of trickle out?
So I think what we would do is I had drafted questions based off of a publicly available example from the Qualtrics's website. Well, you had to sign up for it, but it didn't cost anything. And I sent it to the members. I don't think any of them actually read it at one meeting where that was on the agenda. And then we said on the March meeting, we really would read it and people would review those questions. The idea is that we would then wordsmith the questions with the superintendent, then come up with a plan in the summer about how we would roll it out to probably, I think the thinking was direct reports as the draft to get feedback. We need to talk still as a committee and with the superintendent about what the output of that would be, because our question was, we really can't do confidential evaluations, right, as a public body. So we have to think through, are the individual documents, they're probably not have to be released, but they would be able to be requested by a Freedom of Information Act request.
Mm-hmm.
So we would just have to talk through, what that looks like and how we preserve the respondents' anonymity through that process.
Right. Do you guys have questions or comments in that regard, or helpful?
So I do. So targeting summertime, is that because can you see it taking that long to hammer out the process, or is there some other reason why we're targeting the summer as opposed to sooner?
It's because the majority of the subcommittee felt that it wasn't the right time to be doing it during this pandemic year, and they wanted to wait till the clarity of the summer where it could be more focused and not asking people in the midst of an unusual circumstance to reflect on these questions. They wanted it to be in a normal time. Whether the summer is a normal time, I don't know, but that was what the majority of the subcommittee wanted.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, and who's to say when we're ever going to be in a normal time, right? So I guess I do wonder, at some point, if it's a tool, and in fact it's something that was a focus of one of our past subcommittee meetings and moving forward. If it's something that that people feel are important, I'm not sure the benefit of trying to find the right time. I'm afraid we may not find the right time.
I would be. So I think you also run up against some deadlines, right? So if they're meeting again in March to hammer out some to all the questions, and then they need to go back to the superintendent, we're talking probably mid-April, which is when we as a committee are doing our evaluations of the superintendent, which then Ken needs to, and I need to put together in a narrative, and we need to vote on. And then you go into May, which is town meetings and elections, where you may have a new school committee present. So I would see, I think summertime, just in those logistics, Mike, but I wouldn't put a date on it, right? So, if we give Ken a charge to say, hey, by July, we want this ready to roll out for the new school year, I think that may be reasonable.
Oh, that was the purpose of my first question, is just to understand the timing of the logistics. If it's something that can be done quicker than the summer, then that's interesting to know. If it's something that cannot, because of the logistics that you mentioned, then that's interesting to know too.
Let's say you can.
Yeah, I mean, I would have done it 3 months ago, but the subcommittee feeling was that you know, for both reasons, the reason Megan suggests and the not sampling during pandemic times was what the subcommittee felt was appropriate. So, you know, it's not really my role as the chair of the subcommittee to dictate. You know, I'm just reflecting what the committee's will is.
Yeah, no, and my question,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, I'm not looking for you to dictate by any means. I'm just asking a logistics question, and I don't know if it's appropriate or not. It may very well not be. I guess on one hand, if the decision by the subcommittee is to not do this now, it sounds like perhaps you're going to take it up again in March and ask again, when do we think is the right time to do this? Am I understanding that right?
Yep.
Thanks, Ken, and thank you all for your feedback. Mike, you're next on my screen. How's business finance going? What's going on now, and where are you guys headed?
So for business and finance, we're trying to get a handle on where we are with respect to budget for this year, expenses against budget, but in particular, the budget process for next year. You know, we had a great deal of emphasis in our subcommittee meetings to be sure that the administration was taking care to solicit and fold in the priorities of the full school committee. And that particularly with last year, there was some sense of not having an assessment of the cost and the opportunity cost, the cost of doing something or a particular priority, or the opportunity costs of having some things not being included. And so we took great care to point that out. I don't remember in the time that I've ever been on school committee a time when we have had a budget retreat or a time to talk about those priorities and we weren't allowed to discuss it. And I think that we did not give the full level of import and time to the budget retreat process in that regard. And I think that if that stands, that's a big miss for us.
We do have another meeting coming up, right? And it is focused on the budget, correct?
So we have a budget hearing. And the budget hearing, as I understand it, is where the administration is going to put forward their budget to the public and to us as what they intend to move forward with, and then move forward and vote upon. So, at least at that meeting, I would expect that at a budget hearing, the administration is going to take the inputs that they've heard from our committee and fold that in and take that into account when they bring forward a budget at budget hearing. But there are some key factors that go into next year's budget that are very concerning to me. There is a particular focus. There's always a focus on what's our assessment going to be, but now we're hearing it from towns that we don't typically hear that from. There is a particular focus on what is the level of program that's going to be offered. And there's a focus, I think, on what's the district's commitment to trying to bring some portion or some population of our students back into the building more than what's there now, and potentially on a full-time basis. And when you balance or try to balance those three things, I think that's the lens that a lot of people are going to be looking at our budget on. And those things have counter levers to them. And we did not get a straight answer on what the 4 million plus budget increase that's being projected translates to for assessments at the towns at this point in time. But I think that if we were to wait until the budget hearing, I think that we're going to find ourselves in an imbalance in a lot of those areas. And that's concerning to me. And it's concerning that we never, as a committee, as a full committee, had a discussion on that.
So Mike, can you just break that down a little bit more for me? So I'm hearing more time needed to discuss budget priorities. This imbalance that you speak of, so is that imbalance between the programming that the public perceives us as offering and the amount of increase that is potentially going to be presented before them?
And I would say, what kind of expectations can we set for bringing students back into schools? So, for example, if we need to make
How is that? So isn't that partially at least dictated by how DESI may or may not move on the social distancing that we have in place right now? Because I'm trying to picture where we put more kids into buildings physically.
So I think that we need to make some assumptions around that. And it may be an if this, then that kind of analysis.
Okay.
But for example, I would say to you that if we have 50% of our students that are in the high school right now, and part of the issue was that we were doing half days because we couldn't figure out lunch, perhaps we ought to be trying to get those students at least in for a full day.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that there is some creativity and some planning that we can do to at least target some priority areas, whether we're talking about continuing to intensify those students who are at risk and getting them back on a full-time basis, getting K through 2 back because we know that they're at potential for significant learning loss by being remote, getting them back full-time. I'd like to see some kind of prioritization, something, and it's not just me. I mean, I think that the public,
I'm kind of picturing what you're saying, right? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I see where you're going, and I think, Daryl, this might be helpful if I'm right. So we have the traditional budget layout, which we kind of saw the other evening, right? So salaries and stipends, transportation, like the traditional breakdown with explanation of where we needed more funds and where we might need fewer funds. But Mike, I'm almost picturing like an additional addendum to that tradition where it lays out to an extent what you're speaking about, an if-then chart, right? So where are our budget priorities in regards to reopening? So if the world stays at 6 feet, we could at least bring back K through 2, and this is where it happened, and this is where our priority is. Or if we stay at 50% wanting remote at the high school, our priority is bringing kids who are staying in the building back all day. So almost having a very explicit layout budget-wise of where the money can be best spent in order to bring back the most important or largest number of students. Does that make sense? Not just verbally, but something people could see and touch and feel and know.
Well, I mean, one suggestion, my first retreat 9 years ago, we would go up to the board and write our priorities down. And on a Saturday, if you remember, Ken and Christina, we went around and read everybody's priority.
And didn't we have like little stickers too? Like I remember even doing this like sticker.
And so I know we have a budget meeting coming up. Is it something that we could do via email for all the members to send to the administration and Randy,
like a jam board, right? Like with like the Post-it notes and then the little dots underneath it.
Exactly, something that because if we have another meeting, it's going to be another lengthy meeting, and so I'm just trying to cut down on time and saying if the members could send an email and compile it, and the administration can look at it and say, okay, this is where our priorities are to reopen schools, and as Mike said, maybe the high needs kids to get them fully back in, just so the committee members are heard on their priorities. And because I think last meeting, I really didn't get to speak much on my priorities. So it was a long meeting. So that's just my suggestion, that we could do it like maybe email something and have a deadline and all the members send it in.
Yeah, as long as it's not a reply all, we could send it to Randy or Rebecca, who then could compile it into a single document. That would be more cohesive.
So that might be okay, but I think that what I'm noticing is that we're missing is collaborative discussion. And if this were me and my company, I would have an electronic mural board, and we would have a facilitated process, right, of identifying all of the universe of different priorities, putting them in different kind of categories, and then having a voting mechanism against them in some way. I'm not assuming that we're going to do that, but it would at least assume that we're going to have some kind of discussion. And when I hear about the time balance that we're trying to strike, I mean, Megan, I think you rightly put it when you said that the budget is one of, if not the most important things that the school committee does, yet we attributed the least amount of time in that meeting on this topic the other night. Quite frankly, it probably should have been its own topic for a singular night, because it's a heavy enough piece of discussion.
In the past few years, we've been doing this kind of like 90-minute before the meeting thing, and it has been enough time. Maybe it's the mechanism of the internet that makes it more challenging.
If I can put out there why I think that is that in the before times, way back when, we used to have like a 3-hour meeting on Saturday morning. There was bananas. They called it a retreat. It wasn't a retreat. And we had like 3 hours of it. And the reason I think we stopped that and went to the 90-minute session was that when we came up with the strategic plan was really now the committee's priorities. But we're not in the strategic plan time right now. Now we're back into like, the world is falling apart, and we need to figure out, with the limited resources we're going to have and all of the competing demands of cutting teachers, adding counselors, whatever we need to do. Like, I think the time is back where we actually need to have that discussion, where I think the past few years we didn't, because if it wasn't part of the strategic plan, then it was really just something I wanted and people put a sticker on. It wasn't strategic, right? But I think the strategic plan just doesn't apply to the environment we're in, because we're sort of outside of what we had planned for. So I think that maybe, at least for me, the tension, because we were there for a good 3 hours in the morning, way back before we had a strategic plan.
But so then my question then becomes, and I guess just thinking out loud as we talk through this, is how do we make this process as strategic as it can be without, like, I want after school buses and we put a sticker next to it, right? So how does it align to some sort of values and mission and not go to like, man, we should have Mandarin in 7th grade, you know?
You know what, you make a good point. I think maybe one of the things that we might want to think about is lining up the 5 domains and having, again, those, maybe not the personal interests associated with, I really want an after school bus, but, I think as Mike mentioned, we've got all these other drivers right now, or levers, that are kind of putting us in a situation that doesn't look like a typical year, as Ken mentioned. So yes, we still have the strategic plan that has to guide us, because I think that's necessary. But at the same time, we have all of these other outside influences right now that we have to deal with, including getting kids back into school. The new transportation guidelines, the updated transportation guidelines just came out this afternoon. We met with the commissioner, and they're upping the number of kids who can be on buses. So that's great. But in order for us to get all the kids into the buildings, we're going to have to play around with the 6-foot distancing, because, again, we're not going to be able to get the kids in. We can get more kids on the buses, but they're not going to have a place to go. So that's something we'll have to talk about as a committee. But, when we're talking about different ways in which we can approach what we're going to do, maybe that idea of looking at the domains, having those ideas put back into those areas, because again, no matter what, we can have conversations and conversations and conversations, but we know we're going to have to hit up, some type of remediation program in the summer. The money that's coming out from Biden, supposedly 20% of those funds have to be put toward remediation. And those funds are coming directly to districts. They're not being funneled through the state. They're coming from the federal government to districts. So that's the good news. The bad news is we're probably not going to see all that much money because we're not a poor district. You know, places like Worcester, Fitchburg, Leominster, you know, they're going to see a ton of money. So looking at how we could, you know, deal with that, how we can get the kids back into school safely, how we can work with our, you know, with our teachers unions and all of our other unions to provide, you know, a safe environment for them as well. On top of the fact that, hey, we're still trying to, you know, educate kids, provide Chromebooks, you know, provide a strong curriculum for them, SEL, all of those things that kind of come into play as well.
Could there be some kind of blend here, Chair, where if, you know, we're sending thoughts to the superintendent and he also has his own thoughts, those could be brought to a meeting where we prioritize and rank and discuss. So it's not just coming at the meeting. I mean, people might still add things, but at least it would give them time to process, you know. So if I was saying I want Mandarin in 7th grade, which by the way is a really good idea if you're going to get rid of French, but if you were to like strategize some of the tactics, right, that people will submit. So like and say, you know, your thing is, okay, strengthening specials curriculum to draw students back to the district. That might be like a general thing that isn't me saying Mandarin or someone else saying strings or whatever, but it's like a priority you're hearing from members, and maybe it doesn't rank very high, but at least it gives the advantage of you having heard it ahead of time, so you can process it, think about where it goes, putting it under the domains, and facilitating a discussion rather than just like it being willy-nilly. I don't know. Yeah. And then you could have your Jamboard live, right?
Yeah. I have a suggestion based off what you guys have been saying. I'd say that you do want to get, like what Ken's talking about, the ideas out there beforehand. And I'm thinking probably the safest way might be like a Google form where we're asked, you have like domain 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, remind people what they are, tell them to look back at the budget documents we already have. If they have additional items that they think fit under a domain 1, then they put them down to, etc. But there's also one that's like pandemic planning or something, whatever you'd call it, and that people can then write, and it's just a form where they're free, you know, they give that short answer part, not the big paragraph, but they can have multiple items, maybe 5 items that they could possibly put under each one. And then the pandemic planning one, they could do 5, you know, they really have to think about what's important. And then you'd have a list of all these things that we could then rate by priority. Once we get the listing, people could then look at all of them and figure out what are the priorities. And then that would be a discussion starter, or at least somewhere where we can see, you know, you might get all kinds of, I mean, you could have, so when I look back at the budget documents, the district has already put the strategic plan items and some of those priority, you know, how they linked up. I didn't see tons, but you've got some there to start. That might be one way to gather information, is through, without having, I'm afraid of the email, what that might look like to go through. So you probably want something that's easy and people have to target their thoughts and not write 5 paragraphs.
It reminds me a little bit of maybe the evaluation process. Yeah. You know, everything's lined up. You know, we give them the format for completing it, and we just kind of, you know, list the items that you want under which, you know, particular domain.
And so remember, is our next meeting the 22nd, or are we waiting until March for the next one? I know, for once it's not already pre-populated on my calendar as a whole committee.
Yeah,
so according to the posting, the next meeting is March 1st. It's
March 1st, right?
So I'm wondering, Daryl, if we can do something like either the week of the 22nd, the week of that 22nd there, like on a Wednesday, just another, and have it timed. So maybe another 90 minutes, right? Where we would say we get this form out, and people would have to do it over vacation. So if you don't do it over vacation, too bad, so sad, right? If you would like your priorities heard, fill out this form over vacation week and say a Wednesday, the 24th, do a 5:30 to 7, right? Timed meeting. It ends at 7. That's what it's going to be, where you would have those priorities that we send in, and then we would have a tailored discussion as to where we think those priorities lie before you send out, the budget documents on the 1st.
So,
I know it's tight,
oh
but
no, it's not so much it's tight because we have a lot of work that we have to do next week, but we have at least 3 meetings scheduled with towns that week.
yeah.
So starting the 22nd, we have Paxton and then maybe Rutland on Tuesday, and then I believe Sterling and Holden on Wednesday. So it's like it's back to back to back to back, and part of it is, and I think Mike had asked for this the other day, and Dan was supposed to get this information yesterday. I just requested this of him, but it's that ESSER money, the ESSER 2 grant money that's supposed to go back to the communities. I didn't have a chance to talk to him today because we were all internet, dealing with that all day. But we, we'll have that information. So he's going to be able to, create those assessments based upon what we presented thus far. Now, and when I talk, and again, I meet with the towns typically way before we have voted, as the school committee has voted on a budget. And oftentimes it happens even prior to a hearing. So the information that I share is like, hey, here's kind of where we're kind of looking, what we're looking at, but we're still, school committee is still working on this, and there could definitely be modifications associated with it. And that's how I sell it to them every single time, that this isn't definitive, and, don't take this as gospel. So it would be tough to do that week because we already have 4 meetings.
So I'm looking at our calendar. So is there a way to make that budget hearing March 15th instead of March 1st? And then we would have more flexibility to you would meet with the towns that week, and then maybe on that March 1st meeting, we meet early to have that discussion of the budget, school committee budget priorities, and then have the budget hearing on the 15th.
Sure. So when do we have to vote, though?
Yeah, see, I think
where does it get wonky for that?
But you know what? Here's typically what happens. I think we're probably better off. I like the concept of what you just said, and I know it's another long meeting, but like if you had that 5:30 to whatever 7 or whatever 7:30, push it off. But you have that time for that. Typically, the budget hearing is me kind of doing a presentation, and there really aren't any questions or comments. It's really fast because it's typically for the public, and I think every once in a while we'll have a select board member from one of the communities show up. They make a comment, and that's about it. Yeah, and it's 15 minutes.
You have it scheduled, right? The budget hearing, as actually right now, it's scheduled as part of the school committee meeting. So it's 7 to 8 that day, and then we start with our business at 8. So, I would not be opposed to having really that budget hearing being kind of a mix of the two, where you'd hear our priorities before presenting the budget to us.
So, part of the purpose of us having discussion about priorities is not to check the box to say that we've done it. It's that they
No, that's not what I'm intending at all. I'm just trying to find
the budget, which is presented at the budget hearing, right?
Right. I'm just,
I don't think you can do those two things in the same day.
I'm just trying to see, Mike, where there's a date, because like if you look at today's calendar, next week's calendar is vacation. I'm not going to ask people to meet over vacation. You're really running into the week after, which I'm fine meeting that week. But if Daryl's already meeting with the towns, I don't want him to kick the meeting with the towns.
Yes, I feel like we jumped ahead, and I hear what Mike's saying about not having. So if it becomes, and I feel like we had this conversation last year, it's the district's budget instead of the school committee's budget, when we haven't talked about our priorities. If we haven't had that discussion about what the priorities of the school committee happen to be, but Daryl's going to the towns and having that conversations, and then we're having the conversation after, it puts him in a really strange situation, because what if there are major changes? He said he tells them, he gives a disclaimer, but people don't always listen to those things. So I feel like if we really want to have the priorities of the school committee reflected in this budget, which is our responsibility, then we may need to, people aren't going to Aspen They're sticking around, I hope. So it's not like I have any plans next week. I'm happy to be with all of you. Whoever shows up, they show up. I mean, in this world of virtual meeting, you could be in New Hampshire at your ski cabin and still attend the meeting.
Mike,
So-
actually, speaking of the cabin, I actually won't have service next week.
Oh.
I'm going to my house in the middle of nowhere, Maine. So, so Mike I'd be fine if Mike wanted to run the meeting if I couldn't be there.
And you know, we did used to have these things on Saturday mornings, and we were talking about what evenings to have them. You know, it's not ideal, but it wasn't ideal then. But I can at least probably still be sort of in my pajamas, at least below the camera, if we had it at our traditional Saturday morning thing. You know,
You don't have your sweatpants on during a normal meeting, Ken? You're doing something wrong.
So
Dates, I'm completely flexible on dates. So you guys tell me when, and I want to make this happen. I think it is extremely important, and I don't want to kick it.
So do you think, okay, so here's what, so one of the things I'm thinking, and whether or not we can move that, that budget hearing date up by, you know, even if we move that up by a week or two, you know, maybe what that would do is allow us to collect this information now in reference to, you know, again, like as Christina said, okay, collect that, you know, all the data associated with the 5 different things, you know, 5 domains and so forth. But as Mike mentioned, have the opportunity to come back to the table and have a broader discussion at the next school committee meeting, which would not be the budget hearing meeting, it would be the school committee meeting. And we'd have those conversations. We'd go through it. I'd have a little more direction. It's one of the reasons why all of this is, and again, I feel like it just gets more and more, it's compressed because everything got pushed back because of the budget not getting finalized for 21 until December. Now, you know, 22 comes out the end of January with the governor. We're kind of compressed in terms of getting all of our timeframes in associated with notifications to the towns, notifications around town meetings and so forth, and it has to happen within the 45 days. So all of that has to come into play. Could, you know, the other thing I could do is, you know, I could maybe push off those town presentations so that, because typically I'd much rather have valid information that I'm presenting to them and be able to go in there and say, hey, here's kind of where we're at with this. It might be a little lower, it might be a little higher, but we're not, you know, I'm not talking 4% one way or 4% another way, or we've totally changed kind of how we're thinking we're going to deal with SEL or technology or something like that. So when I go in there, and the only thing we have to remember also out this year is 98% of the budget's already fixed. It's already done. It's like there's not a lot of wiggle room this year. It's salaries and it's benefits, and that's it. It's like everything else is pretty much the same. It's like we're trying to just keep everything going. So at that 4.2, 4.3% range, that's where we're at. So part of this is also, okay, so do we want to come back to the table and say, okay, what's in that dollar amount? How are we using our $800,000 for textbooks and technology? What do we do? You know, do we still want to have a Chromebook initiative? Do we still, you know, those are the things that can be brought up. I think and one of the things I'm more concerned about is, hey, we do want the after school buses. Hey, I want really small class size. It's like, those are great pie in the sky things, but it's like, we still have to open up the buildings. I still have to pay all these salaries, and our health insurance is going to go up 14%. So,
and I believe, Dal, on that message that you do send out to the full committee, and on us looking at it and our priorities, you need to be very clear on realistically what we can look at and what we can't, like afternoon buses, you know.
I don't want to keep, so I hear what you're saying, Scott. I don't want to keep people from saying, hey, listen, I really want this. I really want this. I totally understand that. And I want people to be able to have those conversations. Those are the conversations we used to have 9, 10, 11, 12 years ago in the media center. The difference over the past 5 years has been we've had that strategic plan. So I've been able to put some stuff out there. People have had some input in it. I think last year there were some concerns around not having enough input. You know, this year I feel like the same way. I'm like, we're compressed again. You know, I'm under the gun in terms of time. I'm trying to get this stuff together. We don't even have our assessments yet because of how the federal funds are kind of getting played out. So if there is the possibility for us to push this off a little bit more, I'd really like to be able to do that. Take that next meeting make that a meeting where we have these broader discussions
Yeah.
after we've already, okay, hey, all these priorities have been sent to Daryl. We've organized them. We put them back out for everybody. Have them discussed,
Yeah.
in live, in public, where we actually go through everything. And then people say, okay, you know what? We really think we would like to have strings back, or we want to have, we want to make sure middle school sports is ready to roll. Perfect. Those are things that I think.
Daryl, would you then be willing to put off and to Christina's point, I think she offers a really strong position. Like, if we were to do that and use the 3-1 meeting, right, to have that discussion, we would have the Google format, which I think is a really nice way to compress discussion and have people have their ideas out there in advance.
Yep.
Because otherwise we're just going to have those random darts, right? I think that's a must. The Google form is a must.
Yep.
Would you be able to push off those meetings with the towns until after the school committee has that broad discussion? Because I think, to Christina's point, if we haven't given our input and you're already going to the towns, again, that puts you in the district and the school committee and the towns in a really awkward position.
Yeah, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna just mute for a little bit. I'm gonna actually give Rebecca a call because she has all the time frames like up here. So let me do that.
Let's move on to Christina while you do that. I think our charge is very clear at this point. And so we'll get an answer on particular dates, but I think this is a good place for Daryl to figure out some logistics, and for Christina, if you're ready to give your update.
Well, you're going to be disappointed because
I
don't have much, because we haven't met since the last time that I've reported to you guys. And I did get some dates from Brendan, Keenan, and Bob Burlow, but right now they've got those dates that Daryl's just, I don't know what they said any day. And I'm like, I don't think that's accurate, because I know they're going to be drawn in all these different places. So I need to take the next step of looking at the meeting calendar with the towns and finding a date to meet. That's, we need to do that. Our plan is to have our next meeting is a 2-hour work session on those district indicators. Like, that's our plan that I had talked about the last time management came together. So that's where we're going. I just need to set the date for that. There was a member that was interested in one of the things we didn't talk about in this conversation here with Daryl was about the staffing priorities, and had sent something to me and to Bob Burlow about including that on a future agenda for Ed Sub, but it's probably going to be talked about at school committee prior to that. The staffing priorities was something that might be a separate part of that Google form. Maybe it's another category, because he did put out some. We didn't really talk about that because they didn't have the plan for us at the meeting on Monday. So people, we were just saying what we wanted. The other thing I don't want to lose sight of on the form is what Mike brought up about, because this is related to education as well, but it obviously is the planning, I don't know what to call it besides pandemic planning, like what are we going to use with what are priorities there? And maybe the stuff that he was talking about for the extracurriculars, which is something Ed Sub talks about, like the buses that keep coming up, but maybe that's a nice to know category on that form, or nice to have category. If money was no option, what were things that we want?
Or even just for future planning, right? So
future.
If he's going to restart the strategic process for the next 5 years, I think those type of things add a lot of, depth to that process. I'll say librarians, because that's my hill for the last 6 years, is having librarians in our media centers.
So that's all I have for you.
That's good. All right, so any questions for Ed Sub? So you did well. No one has questions, Christina. Daryl, are you back with us? Or are you still waiting for Rhoda?
Yeah, no, I'm back. I just left a message.
Okay.
So because again, I just looked through my calendar. I'm looking at when the like the town meetings are. When those first ones are, I have to count backwards and go. So Rebecca has all that,
I know,
like here. So I'll just.
All right, we'll see if she calls you back by the end of the meeting.
Yeah.
All right. She shouldn't. I'll be mad at her if she does.
Well,
but be prepared for it to be mid-March, because it's 45 days before the town meeting is the deadline for Sterling to post to their warrant.
Yes.
So I feel like we used to have it was like March 15th, March 16th, and we usually schedule a meeting for both days in case we couldn't come to agreement the first day, that we
Yes.
already had it on the books for the next day just in case, and then we would just cancel it, just because we were so tight to the deadline. So it will be tight.
We might have to go 1/8/15, 3 weeks in a row.
Well, I think that, so if Ken's correct, so it's like typically like we'd have one, and then we'd have one. So it's the 15th right now. We'd do the 16th or the 17th,
Yeah,
just in case we didn't get the budget passed that first night. But we have to look at the calendar, as you said, 45 days from Sterling's meeting. And Sterling and Paxton typically have their meetings in the same day.
All right, well, let's keep the line of thought open as we continue tonight. Daryl, I think next one's on you. Update on implementation of hybrid.
Sure.
What's new, what's not new? What's going on?
Kind of went through that presentation with everyone the other night about, some of the numbers and so forth that we're dealing with. Today was a little bit of a pain. We had a fiber issue that, coming into our central office, and it was on Spectrum side. So they're our provider. So we didn't have service in several schools, so it threw the day off, especially for, and I feel bad for cohort A kids because, we had a remote day on, Monday or Tuesday, Monday. And then we ended up having today where it was the last day. And I did have a couple of emails from some parents who were concerned that we've had a couple of these now, a couple of days where kids weren't in the building. So I think it just becomes amplified when we have kids only in the building for 2 days at a time during a hybrid model. I mean, I do the same thing as a parent, so I totally get it. I talked to the teachers a little bit about it today, and again, I don't know how it would play out. We'd have to have a couple more of these in order for us to make some modifications to some things, and again, it would require us to do a little negotiations with the teachers union because we already have an MOA in place. In terms of kind of everything else, teachers are really working hard on doing the synchronous piece of it. So having the live piece, having the in-person piece, bringing the kids together. I can tell you it's been a little, the easier part of it is there aren't as many kids coming in. So it's not like a teacher has 22 students in front of them and then they're also doing this. There might be 6 kids or 7 kids. And then there might be, 12 kids or 13 kids because you have A and C at home, or you have B and C at home that they're looking, they're on the board looking in. So that's been something that they've been working through and spending a lot of time on. I think, in terms of just the overall getting kids through the buildings and so forth, first couple of weeks, it takes a little time. We're still telling kids, high school, Kenichi, you can keep telling those kids, social distance. That's the hard one. I mean, kids gather. So, they gather after school, they gather here, they gather there. So that's where it gets a little more challenging for us. So, again, 6-foot distancing, even at the high school right now, has been great. That's really been, something that has helped us just because we've had so many kids go remote, especially in 11th and 12th grade. So Bill's been able to really take a good look at that. I think Ken mentioned this, the hardest part, and this is something that the commissioner mentioned today, is that, even if we're able to get kids into classrooms, it's really lunchrooms that kind of throw the whole thing off in terms of getting a full, amount of students into the building. Because in order to rotate those kids through a lunch space, A, you have to have the people to watch them. B, you have to have enough time to do it. So he said, again, maybe one of the things you could think about is as the weather gets a little nicer, put the big tents outside so you can spread kids out and you can have more than 50 kids eating in a space at a time. That was a big deal. So we're getting through it. I think what will happen eventually is as the immunizations roll out, and I'm hoping they roll out a little faster. Supposedly that's kind of what's coming down the road. So we were told today that veterans who are now teachers will actually be able to get shots a little faster because the VA actually gets their shots directly from the federal government. They don't have to go through the state. So, that's something we'll be collecting that information for veterans who are here and work for us. We'll be able to get them their shots earlier. Everything else goes through the towns for their immunizations. So we're working with the boards of health on that. We do have communities that are going to be using our buildings for vaccination sites eventually. And, again, I talked to the teachers about this maybe last week or the week before. The issue is going to be some towns, Sterling might do their vaccinations 1 week, and then it doesn't happen in Holden for another 3 weeks. That's what I'm a little concerned about, just the discrepancy. So they're not, because again, they're all independent boards of health. They're not all one unified group.
Questions, comments, guys?
I guess I just have a comment about, so like the bus today, the busing restrictions were reduced to nothing, essentially. Like they're all lifted. So the busing is lifted, this physical distancing. In schools, we want to keep 6 feet because we don't want close contact, but classrooms can be 3 feet, but then we have close I'm just very confused. And I don't know how, as a district leader, you're handling that really confusion. It's like load the buses up, load the kids in the school, but keep them apart. Then it's just confusing. That's one thing. The second thing is, and I know you don't have an answer to that. I'm just making a point. The second item or one of the things you said was the teachers were working really hard. I know you appreciate their work, and I'm just wondering, I know there are restrictions to going in the buildings, but obviously not for the superintendent. I'm just wondering if you've had a chance to be able to go walk in the buildings and see what they're doing, because I know it would mean the world to me as a teacher if someone came in and saw what I did every day in this environment. And there would be another body in the room, but you're saying the high school anyway is a little empty for some of the classrooms. I just think for some teachers that would just be an amazing morale booster to have the superintendent come in and actually see what the cleaning looks like, what the teaching looks like, the management, because it's just a whole different world for us, for teachers. Sorry, I don't work in the district, as you know.
Oh, no. And that's the thing. I know how unbelievably challenging this is right now. And it's great because we met with, I meet with WREA, every week for once a week. And, we really have a nice opportunity to kind of talk about, okay, how is it working? What's working? What isn't working? Mary was great today. She brought up the fact that we have 2 new technology integration specialists, and they have just started on the ground running because they're certified teachers, they're former classroom teachers, but they also know technology like there's no tomorrow. And because we didn't have that, I think teachers really felt like they were on their own. So we did the best we could to provide support to them. And, Barry and his crew, his tech crew, did everything they could to, okay, make sure you know how to use Seesaw and all the different items that we have. But these new people that we have on, as well as the person that we already had at the high school, have been just integral in terms of, making those steps happen. In a way that I think's much, much easier. I've already received like 3 or 4 emails since this, one person who was over at NAQUAG for like a day or two, like from teachers saying, this is unbelievable. All of a sudden, so that's the type of stuff that I think we're just so, excited about, because that's what's going to help everybody kind of transition over. I mean, the other part of it, as you just mentioned, is we're going to have issues. It's been lifted. So my meeting was at 2:30. So I had my meeting with them, then I went into the teachers union, and then, I'm here now. But in terms of the restrictions, it's wide open now. So anyone could get on a bus. I just don't know. And that's one of the things I brought up a little earlier. So right now through the superintendent's listserv, people are kind of putting out there, hey, who's at 3 feet? Who's doing 3 feet, who's doing 6 feet, who's doing something in between. A lot of and again, we kind of knew this was coming, but we didn't think it was going to be like, hey, just fill the bus back up. So it was a little bit of a surprise for us. And when there were some questions about this today to the commissioner, his response was, DESE from the very beginning has been saying that the 3-foot distancing is fine. And that's what they're saying that should be allowed in schools. And he said, unfortunately, most school districts are using 6 feet. And he's like, those school districts that are doing 3 feet, they're going to be able to get kids back in, much more regularly in terms of having more kids in classrooms. But he said the 6-foot distance districts are going to be really tough. So he kind of is encouraging us to look at, making that space smaller, not keeping it at 6, bringing it down to 4 or 3, 5, 4, or 3. The new person who's going to be running CDC is, I believe, she's from Massachusetts. She's a doctor from either Tufts or Harvard, and she was an integral part of making that decision around 3 feet here in Massachusetts. So he's thinking that there's going to be some new guidance from the CDC either tomorrow or next week that talks about actually limiting that space and bringing it down from 6, maybe to 4, 5, 4, or 3.
Do you think the contact tracing then would change as well? Like, what are you thinking about
I would
that?
hope so. I
Because
can't
that
even
doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
Because everybody would be in close contact.
Right. The part that's really challenging for us is, so now stick all those kids on a bus.
Yeah.
You are talking literally 7 or 8 kids at least, around that seat where that student was COVID positive. That's an issue. And that's where you're going to take out, all these things.
And then all those kids go into their individual classrooms where you now sit at 3 feet instead of 6 feet, and then you doubled those classrooms from those 7 rooms that the kids are in.
Right.
And 3 feet is pretty much normal
sitting.
Because I did mine today because I knew this was coming, right? It's coming. So all my kids could come back in my room in school, and I was like, this is just like it was before, but we haven't. But this, I'm curious to see this guidance that's coming out from CDC. Is it for tomorrow?
I heard tomorrow.
Yeah, he said tomorrow, but he said it also could be next week. Now, his expectation is all schools are going to be fully open in September. Now, people, there still might be mask wearing, there still might be hand sanitizer, all of those precautionary measures, but my assumption is the social distancing piece is going to be almost non-existent if you're talking about putting 2,000 kids in the high school plus 500 staff. You
might as well just have concerts.
Well, exactly right.
Let's go back to the ballpark.
Right. So
let's talk about the outbreak at UMass. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Like, so we do that, but then you look at at UMass Amherst and what they're reporting on the news and the crazy cases, and we still have the consideration for lunch, which I think those are still at 6 feet probably. So that's a tough sell. I'm wondering if he has given you, he being the commissioner, has given you any recent studies, or if you guys have anything at your office that maybe you share with the committee so that we could be convinced that less than 6 feet is okay. Because I know in my work district, they've tried to convince me. I just haven't seen the studies. They just tell us about them. But
studies, I promise.
And that information, Christina, came from DESE over the summer. And that's all there is. There has been nothing else. It was them, working with some, medical experts and, coming up with that 3-foot distancing. So that was really their guideline. There's nothing, I don't think there have been any studies. Maybe they're happening right now, but I don't believe there have been any comprehensive studies looking at kind of how that works and, in terms of, catching or transmitting. The other piece of all of this is the Binex antigen testing, and then the pooled testing. So the other part that they're pushing is antigen testing, which we put our application in today with DESE, and really that's the rapid antigen testing, the quick swab that would be done for staff or students that have COVID symptoms. They'd be isolated, and you'd have a result in 15-20 minutes, And, depending upon what the result is for the adult, they might stay, they might go, but for the student, no matter what, they would go home and probably get, the other test. So, when we're looking at, the antigen testing and then moving over into the pooled testing, the issue with the pooled testing, and I believe MASC sent something out to all members yesterday that actually it was an 8-page document that kind of reviewed, here's pooled testing and here's why it has worked in Wellesley, Newton, I think Westford, maybe really very affluent areas. We know why it works because they put a lot of money into it and they had the personnel to take care of it. So with the pooled testing, it's really comprehensive. We're starting with the antigen testing. We're going to see how that works. The pooled testing, if it's something that we could do maybe by the school or at a small level, we're still going to need like a project manager full time to run that. So I would need another body to run that. We still can't find a resource nurse, that head nurse. They're not out there. So that's we need that body. On top of the fact, you probably need some other people to help out in the buildings, because in an elementary school, it's going to be a nurse walking down the hallway, going into classrooms, getting 10 at a time and putting them in the tube and then going out. So, and then they have to get driven into Cambridge twice a week. And then you have to have the testing site after the fact. So once you get a positive test, those 10 people who have, were part of that pool, all have to have the real test that we provide at a testing site. Towns can do this because they're kind of doing it already. Like a lot of places are doing it with police, fire, DPWs. A regional district to do this, it's going to be a challenge. And it was funny, we talked about this with the teachers union today, and we were all like, at first it's like, wow, that sounds really great. We can't wait for that to happen. But once you get into the details associated with it, it is exceptionally complicated.
And I know we're also preaching to the choir. So when Christine and I say these things, we're like, we know, but just to put them on record as well, when the commissioner says these things and pushes these things forward, as you said, it doesn't seem like vaccinating teachers becomes a higher priority in order to get the kids all back into school and have the teachers be comfortable being in school at the same time. So, I mean, if you have a push at all, pushing that, I think, in tandem with getting kids back has to be the focus, right? So, forget about driving somebody if they're 75 plus, about driving somebody with an ID, I work at a school. That was really frustrating, I think, for educators the other day to say, so I just got kicked down the line one more time, in the same breath saying, hey, all the kids need to be back. And while we're at it, guess what? MCAS counts. We said it was just to get, a diagnostic, but hey, if you're in 11th grade or 10th grade, you're not graduating without passing this test. So joke's on you,
Yeah.
And it's when you just keep banging your head against the proverbial wall.
And I can tell you there is a big push from the MASS group, the superintendent's group, to have that done. And the response is, it's HHS and DPH. It's out of DESI's control. It's not in. So because it's not in, within their purview, they're just
but as a lobbying group, I'm sure DESI knows how to lobby quite well.
Right, and they have that lobbying group, but I think ultimately the issue that's happening at the state level is that the governor's getting hit in, from all directions, and on top of the fact that I just saw a study just came out yesterday where I think Massachusetts was ranked 43rd out of 50 states in terms of the rollout of the vaccination and so forth. So that was a Harvard study. So he's taking a hit just in general.
Just to push on you a little bit, we're a regional district, but every school is different, and regional high schools, including Christina's, including my wife's regional high school, have been doing testing for months and making it work because they have the kids that are more likely to be transmissive, the ones that are basically little adults. I don't think we're using the excuse that we're a complicated regional district to do nothing. It's something that could be piloted at the high school and work its way down, or piloted at the middle school, or wherever you're going to pilot it. But we don't want to always just use the excuse we're too big and complicated. Do something and then expand
Yeah,
it,
and I'm not
right?
right. The first
Yeah.
step was the antigen testing. The second step is the pool testing. So we had to get the we had to get the okay with the antigen. So that happened today. And when I said was it super complicated for a district our size, but we've already talked about doing it in pilots, like a Mount View or a high school. But again, we just have to make sure that we then have at least a body or two more to help take care of it. And the state does cover the costs associated with 6 weeks of this. So that's the good news. And he said today that no matter when we start, it's 6 weeks from the start date. So if we don't start until the middle of March for something like pool testing, then we would have until the end, basically the end of April. And we would only be responsible for, May and June.
Because LS caught 11 cases yesterday, so they're remote now.
Wow.
It's out there. The other thing, just to go back a second, because the conversation kind of drifted, I do think what this speaks to is that you need to be prepared, and I think as Mike was saying, in the budget for all possibilities next year, because so a full in-person and in-person hybrid and an in-person with perhaps a virtual academy. Like, if you could find out why so many high school kids are remote, we know we have one of them. I don't know if you're remote or not, Kenichi, but one high school student who could speak to this. But if 55% of the high school kids aren't there now, there's going to be some pool of them who don't want to be there in September. So if we can be creative about thinking about, is there a remote academy that keeps them from going to TECA and spending $10,000 a kid or whatever, because if you look at our school choice numbers, I was looking at the other day, we're spending on average like $9,800 a student. I think it's $380,000 we're writing a check to TECA this year for, right? So we just have to be creative about coming up with models that we don't just wait for DESE. We might not use them all, but finding some use of your staff or your principals or whoever can do that work for you to start coming up with creative things to be ready in advance, to bring to the teachers so that we can have it ready to roll in September and think about the budgetary implications of model A, B, and C.
And
anyway.
I can tell you, that's a great point around there was a question around whether or not the state would allow for remote learning in the fall. And he said districts can have virtual academies, but he's not going to do the same remote learning. He's not going to allow it in the same way. So you're right. I think we're going to run into that issue where we could have people saying, I'm going to go to TECA if I can't be, at home and learn remotely. So that's going to be a huge change. And that was kind of I think superintendents were a little shocked by that today, because some districts were already talking about, hey, maybe we might start remotely next fall. And he literally just came out today and said, my expectation is everyone's going to be in school full force. And he's like, if it's not, if not by the end of the spring, then definitely by September.
Yeah, and I think that's, I want to piggyback on Ken's point right there. Like for the percentage, and Kenichi, I want you to jump in as well, but for the percentage of students, especially at the middle and high school level, who have extreme anxiety and remote is actually working better for them. I mean, that might just be 10%, but 10% of those kids is still a few hundred kids. I think they've been secretly looking forward to, okay, I can do high school online and it's awesome. And my life is better this way. They are going to flood to TECA or Greenfield because they realize that they're more successful not being surrounded by peers that make them anxious. Kenichi, you're off mute, so I'm assuming you got something.
Yeah, I just want to check something. So when you said in person, and Dr. McCall, you're talking fully in person like we had pre-COVID, correct? Okay. It would probably, the change is going to be really sudden. Like I've been remote this entire time since March. So I'm definitely not going to have an easy time the moment we get back into in person. I think something good will be to host some events at the high school just to get kids who've been remote this entire time into the building. There may be students who don't exactly know what they're going to be expecting in September, so maybe host a few slideshow presentations in the auditorium, just giving like a rundown of what it's like. I believe there are freshmen who don't really know the layout of the school, know the teachers. So just another like a school tour, because they haven't had that chance. It's been either virtual or only the hybrid kids have experienced it.
Right. It's like, so it's like a, more orientation time.
Just
for
getting
those
back.
students. Yeah. And I think getting back
Just
into
going
the
back to
swing of things, so-
socialization, right? Like we think about
Right.
socializing kindergartners, but we also have to socialize our ninth graders too.
So that's a really good point, Kenichi. And I know when we talked about that, Kenichi, with Principal Biendo, that was one of the things that he was looking at, even when we were transitioning from remote to hybrid recently. And he did offer that up, especially for the kids who had never been in the building before. So that, the ninth graders, and you got to think those kids who were in ninth grade last year were only in school until, March. And then they didn't come back until January. So I think they needed to get reacclimated as well. So even kids that are juniors and seniors, I can tell you that in a lot of districts, though, there are a lot of juniors and seniors. If they have the choice, they're going remote because it's just a little easier for them. And I think they feel as though, okay, in terms of transitioning, it makes it a little easier for me. I'm not going to school at 7:30 in the morning, getting up at 6:30 in the morning, and I can do my class, from my bedroom, and it's a little bit of a different feel. So I am seeing, that's not necessarily just Wachusett. That's in many districts right now.
And there's really no way to combat that. I mean, if they
No,
feel
well-
more comfortable online, even with the school fully open, that they're going to stay online, and we're going to lose that $9,000.
Right. So I think one of the things, and this is how I think it's, will play out. We have to think about, and I've started this conversation already with my administrative staff and with Mary Bean Montague. We have to think about how we can have a virtual academy that we establish that allows us to provide this type of transition for these kids, because otherwise, like Ken mentioned, kids are just going to say, I'm jumping off to Greenfield or I'm doing something else, and we will lose those funds. So we have to be able to provide something for them, and whether or not, not the shared teaching, not kind of how it's working now, but a true academy where we're pulling, we have teachers who are providing that support, and their role is virtual. That's their job. So that's one of the things we're pulling together now, how we can make that happen. So we're going to also have to, again, as we push the commissioner on this today, we need some more definition from him, because as we survey kids and families about, hey, what might you want to do in September? We have to do that soon, because we need to know what numbers are going to look like. I need to know, okay, I'm talking about 400 kids at the high school who might still want to be remote. So we're going to have to pull X number of teachers offline. Bill's going to have to rearrange his schedule, and that has to happen soon, because that's a really complicated schedule to take care of up at the high school.
No, I would recommend that's a high priority, because if we don't have a roadmap on that and to show the parents of this district, I could see it being a disaster comes September. So.
Now, Daryl, do you have to apply for the academy? Like in the past, if you wanted to have a special program like that, you would have to make an application to have like a school within a school. I would imagine the commissioner sounds like he's being kind of a jerk a little bit. I don't know a better word about this. Like he just wants everyone back in school, regardless of what's going on. We don't know what's going on health-wise or what will be happening. But so I assume you'd have to make this application and get it approved by and that's a lot of work.
Well, and that's what was interesting today, was that I think people made the assumption that we're just going to be able to carry this over, because he's talking about the licensure time frame. So not having you don't have to have the license. So there's that waiver that was supposed to end in June of this year. Well, it's now not going to end until June of next year. So people will be able to come on board. There's a way. So we're like, oh, okay. So he's really thinking positively about this. And then this kind of got dropped on us, because people were like, hey, how are we going to do remote in the fall? And he's like, well, there's guidance around virtual schools, on the website, and that's something you'd have to look at. And I'm just typing my notes, just going, I can't believe he just said that, because it makes it very challenging for us to say, we're all going to be replicating this same process in every single school. It almost seems like, hey, we should just come together with like 4 or 5 other high schools, have a really strong virtual high school somehow, some way, and split the funds.
Oh, sorry, Megan, I can't see you, so I didn't know you had your hand. So let's go Mike and then Mary, because I think Mary's had her hand too.
Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to bring the conversation back to this year for a moment. So, hearing that we are at 50% of the students in the high school that are actually coming in, and understanding that, their in-person time is really 20% of the time, right? They're there for 2 days, half the day. Given that we have, and by the way, I suspect, although I don't know, that part of the decision-making process is, why am I going to get up early to go in for half the day? But for those who are going in, do we, given those numbers, now have the opportunity to revisit making high school, for the 2 days that those students are in school, a full day instead of a half a day?
Yeah, so I actually started that conversation with Bill yesterday. What we have to do is look at it's clearly the lunchroom, and it's the rotation for lunch as we kind of go through that process. So he is thinking that it might be something that's doable. The one thing that we're dealing with right now, though, and this is where I'm a little concerned, is that we are getting more parents saying that they want to leave remote and go into hybrid. And we're seeing this at the elementary school quite a bit. We might not see it quite as much at the high school, Mike, so it might not be as much of an issue. And I have already had those conversations with Bill about, okay, how do we get them in, on a more regular basis? It doesn't make any sense if the reason why they're only going half a day is because we couldn't get them in for lunch. Well, if we're talking about less kids, let's do it. But we are. Yeah,
my hope is that that's not an insurmountable logistical issue, and that we can be creative, find ways of getting there. They're already there in the building. Yep. If they're half the number of people than we expected, I have to hope. I have to believe that we can figure out a way to get them there for the full day, and I hope that can happen soon. The second question that I had was, Ken made a comment, an anecdote. At our last meeting, that I think on the bus, Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, he said that you're 3 or 4 students on a bus. And I don't know if that's an everyday, I don't know if that's, but I guess my question is, that's a tremendous observation to me. It may be an outlier, but what are we doing to view the bus riderships, and are we actively looking at either rerouting or doing something that we have better utilization of our buses?
So what I can tell you is that right now, AA Transportation does not have the capacity to do rerouting. Their person that we work with is actually driving a bus because they are so short-handed. So they, even for changes right now, for additions, it's weeks. They keep pushing it off because they do not have personnel to run the routes, to change the routes, to make the modifications, because there's a secretary in the office and that's it. It's, I've been pushing Dan's been pushing them to look at this because, again, I was up at the high school when, the buses were rolling in and, there are like 3 kids on a bus, 4 kids on a bus, 2 kids on a bus. It was, I was kind of blown away. But the other part of it is a lot of kids are driving, and we have a lot of parents dropping kids off. So if there's a way for us to save a little money, reroute, we pay for the buses for the whole day. That's one of the issues. So we're going to use them. But as Ken mentioned, if it saves on, oil, if it saves on, the environment by not having a bus run all the way to Sterling and back and just rerouting, we'll do that. But we actually have to get the bus company to take those steps. We can't do it, internally.
Yeah. So I hear you, Daryl, and I guess I'd offer this perspective. I mean, in this day and age and in these times, we as a district need to be very adaptable and flexible. And I think that we need to insist that our providers are also adaptable and flexible. The downward side of this is that when we're trying to pass for what would probably and likely be a sizable budget increase, one that's greater than I think our towns are telling us that they want. One need look no further than the number of kids that are coming off the bus as an example of us not using or best utilizing our existing resources. So I suggest you keep that in mind and continue to push the bus company, but we continue to look at that. And then the third item that I had was, again, just an observation on the 188 failed courses that was up from the previous year. There was a question by one of our members that said, well, how many students was that? And I thought that, I don't think you had the answer handy, and I'm not sure if it was just that it wasn't handy or if it was that we were unable to do it. And I was trying to square that with how are we providing remediation to students at risk if we're not able to identify who these students are in that number of 188 course failures.
So the way that gets pulled, the course failures get pulled out of Power School, directly from the data. So when I was talking with Jay Howe about this as well, and Bob was as well, she couldn't extract that individually. Each school has this information already, Mike. So it's just a matter of us saying, hey, by the way, Central Tree, let us know the kids who are failing, let us know this. But according to Jay, who is our Power School person, there's no way to pull that information out succinctly so that we can break it down.
Yeah, and I guess this is one of those areas where, if you try not to be a slave to the system, right? Because we don't know that because the system doesn't tell us. I have to believe that tracking the number of students across the district who are at risk and are exhibiting course failures, particularly more than one, is something that the district wants to know and track. And if you're not able to do it for the Jay Howe report in Power School, there ought to be other ways that you can get to that information, and that you probably should, because I think that's the information that you would want to know.
Right. So we have it. So when we've looked at this individually, we have lists of students by school. It doesn't necessarily mean that lists include students who have, they're failing a class, or they're, it might be because there's a social emotional thing going on. It might be because they're tuned out, they're passing, but guess what? They're not getting online. So we have that list of students. We can go back through and literally, talk to each building and go through and say, okay, give us, pull out the individual students with courses where they're failing, and have that as a compiled list, yes. But the list that we've pulled together is more comprehensive, is that it's more than just kids who are failing.
Right. Mike, if you don't mind, I'd love for Mary to jump in before she forgets what she was going to say.
I keep reminding myself, I want to express concern about the virtual academy and the fact that it's raised by the commissioner, and the fact that by the sounds of it, the virtual academy may fall into the charter territory, and that we should be really well aware of that. There has been a lot of conversation about the amount of money, private money coming in to public education in creating these pods and things. And we know how the adjunct professors have, how that gig economy has affected the colleges with the adjunct professors. And I think the biggest fear, it's a fear of mine in public education, and it will take away community. Like, we are community, and being community is the most important thing that we have to offer. And being an individualistic culture is really scary in a sense. So I didn't realize that was part of the commissioner's conversation today, Daryl. But I would really keep my eyes thoroughly looking at that.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Anyways.
It was one of when I was talking about all the things that he mentioned today, it was just such a short little blurb because it was one of the questions that was asked at the very end. So as we were just kind of going through this, I'm like, yeah, he really put that out there.
it should be a big red flag for us as a community, you know, as a school committee, as a district, and as parents and stakeholders in education.
It's a
So,
huge red
thank
flag.
you for letting put my 2 cents in.
No, it's a good 2 cents. It's a good 2 cents. And you almost think of like, you know, do you create a central mass collaborative? Like, does the Midwatch schools create a virtual academy that's a public school thing? Because Mary, I totally see what you're saying, and I can see it blowing up, like, because it's a for-profit, right? Like, you can do a nice little.
Well, right. Well, I can just see all my you know, my businessmen, you know, business people that are in my life. I can see them. Oh, like cha-ching, cha-ching. Oh my goodness, look at, you know, my Pearson stock's going up. Whoa, this is great.
The Pearson Remote Academy coming to you fall 2021.
Yeah.
The way
I have friends who are in
I
the
can
Pearson
see
Remote
that.
Academy.
Yeah, I can see
Their
that,
kids are
but
doing that now.
the way I was picturing it was that it would be a creation from what Daryl was saying. In my mind, I was picturing it as a creation of the Wachusett system, that the Wachusett system would create, because I've seen, I mean, I had to do one for my doctorate. I had to create a program and do that application I was talking about. It didn't actually go anywhere, but sort of like what I think Auburn High School did, some kind of like a school within a school type thing, where they had a separated academy. Yeah. And so like, yes, that's what it is. Innovation school. So something like that would keep our kids with us, and it would be staffed by Wachusett teachers and the Wachusett community, not so that we wouldn't lose these kids. I mean, I get the idea of the collaborative, but let those people come to us, like you know, let West Boylston and the surrounding towns come join us for school choice in. So, I mean, it could be an opportunity where we could, or however you would do tuition. I don't know how you do that, but it might be something, but I don't think the private companies, or we want to lose kids that way at all. But certainly if it's something that the district could create, and there are teachers that are like, yeah, I want to do this, and maybe there are teachers out there who are loving, right, who are loving this and want to staff it and want to try it out, even if it's only for 100 kids. To Megan's point about the kids that this is really helping, and Kenichi's talking about that the transition, I can't imagine that. I mean, when you were talking, Kenichi, I was thinking how difficult that would be, if not being in the school for so long, and then all of a sudden we're throwing you in September and saying you have August, probably you've got to come. That's really hard. So, and there are kids that are thriving in this environment, and there are other kids who aren't. So let's try to meet the needs of our kids the best way we can in this crazy situation.
No, but it's, I mean, like Mary said about community, I mean, I keep my son in district. He probably should go out of district, but we do it to keep him in the community. If we had a virtual academy that the kids could be online, do sports at Wachusett, join clubs, and still be part of the community, but if they feel better learning online, best of both worlds. So
we went from 25 to 44 kids at TECA this year, right? So we have 44 kids at TECA right now, and we have 6 in Greenfield. So that's 50 kids right now that we're spending about 10 grand a piece. You could hire an administrator, Daryl, to come up with a program, bring half of them back, and it pays for itself, you know. And they can go to prom, they can be part of the community, right?
Exactly.
And I know people who are doing Pearson this year that left our school to go do that. They're happy with it.
But I'm sure they'd be happy.
Create a program like it where they can go to prom.
Yeah.
They might come back.
Wachusett Virtual Academy.
There you go.
Yeah.
This could be the crowning achievement of your superintendency, Daryl.
Yeah, no, I'm going to put Kenichi and Catherine in charge of it, because
they will have it done by Monday. They will have it done by Monday.
It'll be done by next week.
So, Daryl, on looking forward with the vaccine rollout,
Yes.
Is Jeff Carlson getting any indication that the teachers that opted out this year, that they may come back in late spring to teach if they get the vaccine, or no?
No, we're not hearing anything like that right now. Because of the kind of fluidity and the uncertainty associated with the vaccination timeline, I don't think anyone wants to commit who's we've approved to be out right now.
Okay. And to go back to the buses real quick, the
Sure.
freshman in my house, only one on bus number 55. And
Yeah.
there's a few times that the bus, like 4 or 5 to 6 buses past my house, one bus will just pick him up and he's like, "You're not my bus." He's like, "Oh, I hate to see a kid standing out in the cold." And so he's the only one on bus. And I've talked to Dan about this, and it's frustrating because I know how much we spend on that contract.
So, and part of it is that people say, yeah, you know what? So for every student that drives to school,
My fault.
we have to have a space for them.
Mhm.
So that's, again, that's part of the regional.
So,
Or if parents say they wanted a bus in case they couldn't do it, and they've found out they didn't need the bus, but they keep the spot, so there would be a spot in the bus.
Right.
Not that happened at my house at all.
No,
You're not saving 2
Right.
spots for weeks, boys.
no, but I think, again, I think to Mike's point, and this was something we've already talked about, it makes no sense for us to have, 48 buses,
No.
trucking through 155 square miles, and we're picking up, 200 kids maybe.
All
It
right.
doesn't make any sense. Maybe.
All right, guys. I'm gonna move us along a little bit. Kenichi, unless you had one more thing, because you guys always get to talk first.
Sorry, I had my headset muted.
Okay.
Dr. Michael, when are you going to announce to the public that September is going to be like fully in person for everybody? Because in order to protect transparency, not everybody watches these meetings.
Now,
So
as
it needs to
soon-
get out.
As soon as the commissioner comes out and says it officially, because
Oh,
right
okay.
now it's not official.
Oh,
He said, I want everyone back. He's like,
Mhm.
my expectation is, but there has to be, we're going to have several more steps in terms of how this plays out. And the big one,
Okay.
Kenichi, I think is really going to be, and Christina mentioned this, the spacing, the distancing. So I think once the social distancing is shortened, I think that's when everything's going to change everywhere, and people are immunized. The other thing people have to remember is, even though you get an immunization, Ken's probably going to know better than anyone. You get those 3-4 months where it's really good, and then it eventually starts to drop off.
Mhm.
So it's not like this is just going to disappear. And that's why it's something we're always going to have to pay attention to. It's going to lose its potency over time. So So Kenichi, once we have something official, we'll put it out there. This isn't going to be something where we're kind of say, okay, let's kind of hold back on it. We'll want to tell people, hey, we're not going to do any, we're going to do a remote academy, but for everyone else, we're going to try to get them in. We will need to send a survey out to families to get real information from them, though, as soon as I have more definitive information from the state, but maybe even not. Maybe I just push it forward because I want to know, okay, are we going to have students who want to remain remote? That will help us figure out what we do with, that virtual academy or whatever it is the state allows us to do.
Okay, guys, thank you. That was a really great discussion. These are, I think Mike referred earlier in the meeting to having more collegial discussions, and I think this is exactly the type of discussion he was referring to. So thank you all. I want to get to a few more things, at least on the agenda tonight. Daryl, we put it in the report and stuff. I don't think we've actually discussed the regional agreement pause that we proposed and where we're at with that.
So we proposed to the towns, put a letter out to the towns asking them for basically a 1-year reprieve. The timeline for doing the regional agreement, and Ken was good about bringing this up a couple months ago. It's just we just have literally not had kind of the person power to pull this together at school committee level or at the administrative level. So we put it out there, asked them for a 1-year reprieve, and we'd work on it during this school year and have it completed during FY22. We've had at least one town come back and say they're not interested in doing that. They'd like us to complete it and have it ready to go as soon as possible. And we've had other towns say, sure, no problem. We don't have an issue with it. So Yeah, again, I don't know if it's okay, one town makes the decision. I don't know whether or not it's something that we can just say, because one town said no, we're going to just do it, which probably should be the case ultimately. The issue is just it's like we just have so much going on, and it's kind of a complicated process. Ken was you were involved, Ken, correct, with this when we did it last time, and it went well into the following. It went over the time frame. We didn't do it. It didn't get done within the I think the exact time frame that it was supposed to be done. But I think if we are to work on this, it's a long process. That's all.
So I know
we can start it now.
Right.
I doubt it's going to get done. That's part of it.
How many of the 5? I know Holden was the one saying we'd like to move forward. Who else? Because I'm trying to keep track of in my emails.
I believe Rutland said they were okay with it.
Yeah.
And I believe Paxton did, and I don't believe we've heard.
I don't think we heard back from Princeton, right?
No.
Okay, so I can reach back out to Princeton. So.
And Sterling, you know what? I don't know. I can check with Sherry.
I don't think we heard from Sterling either.
No.
All right. So can we make it a priority to hear back from Sterling and Princeton? And then if it's 4 out of 5 that are willing to wait, then I don't, I think we move forward with waiting. But if the other 2 are wanting to.
Is there a threat of legal action? Because it's a document that is a legal agreement among the towns and the district. So I feel like there's a threat of legal action can you check in would that be something we could do after hearing back? Check with legal?
Yeah, you know what?
Counsel?
I think what we should do, what I'll do is, Scott is on he spends a lot of time with Joe Bartulis now. So
way too much
time. But yes, one of the things we could do is reach out to Joe and just say, Joe, tell us how this would work out. I think that's a really good point, Christina. I don't want to be on the hook for, breaching a contract, per se. So, we'll check with him first.
Yeah, I can send it to Joe tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Scott.
All right, so Daryl.
I think there's two questions that's inherent in there, at least that I've heard, or maybe in my mind. But the one question that I thought I was hearing Christina say was, by not acting as a district and not doing whatever it is that we need to do in advance of the expiration of this contract, are we is there some is there something we ought to be concerned about, right? And then the second question is, if this contract hits its expiration date and there's no successor agreement in place, what is the bad thing that happens, or what happens? And that, I think, is the question that's Scott, maybe you and Daryl were addressing. But I think that I was hearing those two questions and wanted to call them out. I mean, the other thing that I'll say, and I know that it's been a wild year, but boy, I remember us saying this is something we need to do back since May at least. And it's too bad that we're finding ourselves in a place now where we haven't even started.
Scott, can you that's Mike also brings up a good point. What is, if anything, the repercussion of doing nothing? So I think it's just a double question.
I am tapping away right now to Joe.
Thank you very much. All right. So next on the agenda.
I'm sorry, just one thing we should talk about at some point, and it's getting late tonight, but I think this committee is the place to do that, is we should start a discussion at least of what our priorities are of a committee in the regional agreement. I will make, again, the pitch that as soon as we possibly can, your observation about this was a good conversation is in part not because of the people here who I all like, but because of the number of people who are here, right? And I know Scott Hammond, however many years ago this was, 8 years ago, really went through the ringer of trying to figure out, how we could reduce the size of the committee. But I think more people have seen us in action and might be willing to accept the fact that a smaller, more nimble committee, like this could be our moment, right? To convince your town, to convince Paxton that we're broken a little bit. and we really need to make that change, particularly because Holden's just going to keep getting more members, as our population increases. So I think we as a management need to discuss, go through it at some point and say, and it doesn't even have to be administration or ahead of time. We could do it live, right?
Yeah.
And say, what of these things do we think are our priorities? Because I'm going to tell you, Holden's going to come with their priorities, which are going to be about getting K-8 out, which isn't in the agreement clearly written. It's either all or nothing, the way the agreement's written. So, but we need to be thinking about our priorities, not just theirs.
No, I agree, Ken, and I think we should ask every time the agreement comes up. And we should ask the town. So, because 22 members and pretty soon it's going to probably be the 25 is really too much.
Yeah, Holden will probably add 2 more this time around. I mean, literally. So, 22 it's a lot. It's a lot. And I'm just saying, from my vantage point as a superintendent, there aren't a lot of other superintendents anywhere that have this many school committee members.
No, and it's just not fair to school committee members, right?
No.
So my vantage point as a chair, like you get your 2 minutes. I mean, we never really have a discussion. We just hear each other speak. We nod our heads. We can't really talk to one another, and no one really has the ability to have a strong voice or to have, as Ken said, a discussion like this. Like if this was our full school committee, we could have great in-depth philosophical discussions that spur novel ideas like this virtual academy, right? Like no way that novel idea would have appeared during a school committee meeting by the nature of the number of human beings on the call.
Right.
This is an argument for small class sizes is what you're making. Because as you're talking, I'm like, this sounds like my life. I have 119 students, but if I only had this many, but it is really, that's kind of what you're talking about. You can't give everyone the attention and give things the attention it needs.
But this is also a discussion about the priority that this regional agreement should have for us. And so I think let's put the light back onto that. It seems like we have some reasons for ourselves why we want to get on this sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. And Kenichi?
If we do have a smaller committee, I think we can avoid situations like I have to bring it up again Monday.
Oh, go ahead. No, you haven't had a voice about it, and I know you and Kate were concerned, so you're here. So I want you can have your 2 cents.
I forgot what I was going to say.
It's okay. Okay, it's getting late. We don't want to get to the crazy point. All right, so let's.
Can I just ask a question for the notes about this would be about Member Dennis's comment and Member Mills and Dennis about going through the regional agreement. Would it be in this committee or the whole school committee? In the management, just like the management subcommittee look at it. Okay.
I could see that on, a very soon upcoming agenda. Like that sounds like a good meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
And thank you for doing it again. We had promised you wouldn't have to do it every time, so we owe you one. All right, so I want to, my pet project of the policy review, as you guys can probably anticipate, is going to get kicked. But I want to talk quickly about the strategic planning process, and I do want to go to 8, that we have some more students to recognize for our next upcoming school committee meeting. So Daryl, I know you said in your superintendent's report you reached out regarding strategic planning. Has there been any more movement on that?
Yeah, so I actually talked with Mac Reed yesterday. So Mac Reed, if any of you remember, who sat on the...
He did it last time, right, with us?
He did. So he did it with Mars. And, we kind of spoke about, we were talking about a couple of other districts where he's doing this right now, and he's going to go back to his group and talk about revisiting what we might do, because again, we're probably unique as a district in the sense that we've been very good about using the strategic plan to drive our budget discussions. A lot of districts, they have a strategic plan. It lasts for 2 years, give or take, and then it kind of dies out. And because he said, typically what we do is we come into a place that hasn't had a strategic plan for 5, 6, 7 years, and we, create it. I think we did such a good job. We, as in the entire community, pulling this together. One of the things that I thought, you know, we would do is not really say, why recreate the wheel or throw the baby out with the bathwater, but really look at, you know, assessing from, you know, the teachers to the administrators to school committee members, community members. Hey, you know, how are the 5 domains played out? You know, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what are some other things we might want to look at? And then, you know, kind of going through the process again, but at a different level. He just said it probably wouldn't make a lot of sense to just come on in, do the SWOT analysis all over again. You know, we could do that down the road, but he said, if you've got a solid structure that you've established, okay, so could you build upon that? What might you modify? What might you change? So he's working with his, you know, he has a group of people, former superintendents that he's working with. They're going to come back to me with kind of a process project in which they'll kind of lay out, okay, here's how we might do this for Wachusett. Since we've done this once, here's what we might do moving forward. I can tell you it's probably, most of it would be remote for the most part, with the exception of some of the stuff. He said we could probably look at pulling some stuff together over the summer. And then, you know, maybe if, you know, things work out, have more, you know, direct person-to-person contact in the fall. And that might be, you know, where, again, they went out, you know, Mac went to all 13 schools in the district and met with this, you know, every single staff member. So they still would like to try to be able to do that. But if they can't, they're going to have to do it virtually. But they were very willing, and I thought they did a great job last time. In all honesty, I was impressed.
Do members have questions or comments?
Yeah, so I think I have a suggestion. You know, one of my concerns about our interaction with the strategic plan is that year over year, our discussion is about the inputs. There has been little to zero discussion about the outputs. And when we have something like a strategic plan and we're trying to make, and Daryl, you use the term, make an assessment, it's hard to make an assessment without outputs. You can make an assessment about whether or not you put the right inputs that you wanted to put in or the level of inputs that you wanted to put in. But I think the next logical step, at least in my mind, is to be very clear about, and what as a community do we believe should be the right outputs within each of these domains, and are we achieving them? And until we're able to answer that question, to me, there's no other question beyond it. Unless, you know, is there a priority that we currently have that is not being accounted for? But other than that, I think that if your conversation with the group that helped us put this together, to me, I agree with you. Going through a SWOT analysis and trying to come up with the domains is probably not the right exercise. It's what is it that we think should be the right outcomes from these domains, and are we meeting them? And then we go from there.
Okay, I like that point, Mike. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll put that back on Mac in terms of when he talks with his people and see how they can pull that together. I'll send that out to him tonight.
I agree with Mike on this. This was something we talked about in our education subcommittee, that we have these goals, but we don't know how we're meeting them. So that's something that we had discussed too previously, that is that missing part of that strategic plan. And I think it's because we were kind of new at having that plan was a big deal. So having ways to measure whatever goals we end up coming out with will be a great way to know if we're making progress going forward. And this was part of our discussion actually of district indicators. And did we even need district indicators if we actually have a strategic plan that has these outcomes? I mean, this was part of our tension and disagreement, but also our moving forward. So I think it is really important. Just like you would ask your teachers to have, these are the goals for my class, how do I know I've met them? And we don't have that in that plan. So having that in there could be helpful. And of course, it's all up for revision. Like we need to have a cycle of revision as part of that plan. So because it should be a somewhat living document to go with, to make adjustments to.
Great points, everyone. Thank you. I'm going to skip over 7 completely. So on 8, and maybe Kenichi and Kate, you might be able to help with this with Dr. McCall, recognizing student achievement. So we recognized our Project 360 5 ambassadors 2 meetings ago, but it's a priority of mine to be able to recognize some sort of student achievement pretty much at every school committee meeting. So between Dr. McCall's reaching out to principals and what you guys know, I know how challenging it's been for students to achieve during the pandemic and to achieve during remote learning, but they have, right? So whether we recognize some college acceptances that have come through for seniors, or those on the highest honor roll, or new National Honor Society members, or even just a class that's completed a really cool project, or even an elementary school project in and of itself. I'd love to be able to recognize some student achievement at our next meeting.
Are you looking for like one student or like
Or group,
any
either
number?
way.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer a group. We're such a big district. So, whether it was a great lab that you guys were able to figure out online, or, a 3rd grade class that did a novel study completely remote. I think it's, at the end of the day, we're here for education, and I'd love to showcase what's going well, even in the hardest times. Kate?
This might be my little point of bragging, but the Middle School Student Advisory Council is fantastic, and I would be happy to bring them and have you all meet them, because I know they have things that might need school committee approval in the future that they want to talk about.
Yeah.
And so if I brought them all, I know we meet again the week after break,
Okay.
but they're working on clubs right now. We got 2 new club advisors after the school committee meeting, so we're looking for just 3 more. So I know they would all love to meet you, and they have other things that might need to pass through the school committee in the future. So
Can we do that? Is that okay, Dr.
Yeah.
McCall? Make sure. All right. The boss says yes too.
Yeah, yeah. In Catherine, you work with the middle school principals as well, right? So I would just, what we'll do is, Catherine, if you want to send me an email, just as a reminder, what I'll do is I'll just make sure I hit the 2 K8s and the 3 middles, with that, and then we'll be good to go. Thank you. That's a really good one.
Great. Thank you. See, you guys have to come to every meeting and have absolutely no social life. That's really the long and the short of it all. All right, great.
I'd be curious about, usually we have the science kids that come in maybe May. I'd kind of be curious what's happening, if they were able to do their science fair, or I may have missed this in something, but if they were able to do that, what kind of achievements they've done, because they've always been so impressive to me.
Kate, do you have a thought on that?
Science fair did run this year. I think it was this Tuesday, but it might be the Tuesday after break. It's either the Tuesday before or after February break. But then from there they go to like regional fair and then state fair. So we might want to wait to have all of them come, but I know science fair is still running. It's virtual, so they're all sending in video clips of their project. And so they're all videotaping themselves and then sending it in. Some of them are still making boards, others are making presentations, which is the more common thing. But they're still doing something like science fair.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
In advocacy updates, I continue to work with the legislature, particularly Kim Ferguson, in regards to working on the October 1 SIBS report and crafting legislation at the State House in order to kind of mitigate that effect, not just in our district, but all districts. So as far as any sort of legislation and advocacy, that's where my money's in right now. Fortunately, Kate, we lost our MCAS battle today. You missed the sad announcement, but that's pretty much where my money's being spent on advocacy right now. Daryl?
Another major thing, Megan, is regional transportation. I know Dan had his comment about how it's not going to get better, but the governor always lowers the regional transportation money, and the state, the Senate and the House always raise it, but always isn't always, right? So I think that, there could be hope that we could push for, and we probably don't even have to ask. I'm sure Kim and Ann are going to push for this, but we should ask.
And it's almost like we have this like one clump of money, so they can like put it here or put it there. I think they're pushing more towards that October 1 SIMS money because it affects all districts everywhere, not just the regionals. But I obviously will reach out to them. They are so easy and wonderful to work with. So that's easy.
The October 1 Sims is helpful, but we're going to get hold harmless anyway, probably. So it doesn't help us that much, but regional transportation would help us more.
We'll chat.
Yeah.
They're great. Old business, we don't have any new business that you guys would like to put on the agenda for next time. I have the regional agreement for us to walk through as a team. Anything else? Next on the agenda is next meeting. You guys might want to kill me, but I'm looking at March 4th for a couple of reasons. It's 3 weeks. One, we kind of had a giant gap between our last two meetings. Second, I really do actually want to get through these policies, and if we are going to look at bigger things like regional agreement, I'd rather not wait a full month. But if you guys can't do the 4th, I can also do I can do the 11th as well. Any preference?
I personally, I would say it, because it looks like I'm going to be at least, probably 4 meetings at least, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I already have WREA in
Do you
the
want to do 11 then?
Yeah, the 11th would be a little better for me.
Can you guys do 6:30 again, just so we don't go too late in the night?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so let's plan for 6:30 on the 11th, and I will send Randy and Rebecca a message on that, so they put it on the calendar.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. All right. And without
So-
further ado,
So when does Randy really take over full time? Because I send things to both Rebecca and sometimes Randy.
they
So-
call it R&R, so I just send it to R&R.
So right now, yeah, Randy and Rebecca they've kind of morphed into one person. So literally what's happening is that Rebecca's doing a lot of remote, Randy's in, but Randy and Rebecca are working together. So Rebecca's job was just so all encompassing that she's kind of, giving a little bit to Randy here, giving a little bit to Randy here. I'm giving Randy, I'm CCing Rebecca on everything, but I'm going to Randy for something. So what you should do if you are going to do anything, send it to Randy, but just CC Rebecca on it. So that's that next step. And then what's going to happen is Rebecca's going to eventually pull out completely. Because right now she's doing about 10 hours a week to help out, but that's going to drop off over the next couple of months. It's just, and again, Randy is still doing some of her job, which is the special ed transportation. So she's kind of doing double duty. So she's doing a great job. It's a big job.
So in homework for you, Daryl, just to make sure all our ducks are kind of in a row, to reach out to Sterling and Princeton in regards to the regional agreement.
Yep.
I will reach out, or I'll reach out with UCC to Barry in regards to the Google form we discussed tonight.
Yep.
For feedback I'm just writing it down, feedback for budget. And then can you just email or text me tomorrow or early next week about meeting date? Or have we decided that we'll do 3/1 and 3/15?
So here's what Rebecca wrote to me, because I've written, how far can we move the budget hearing in terms of a date? And she said, you can't. I believe 3/19 is 45 days before the first ATMs. 5/3 is, May 3rd is Sterling and Paxton. But that's the budget. I was talking about the budget hearing.
Right.
I believe she was talking about the budget vote.
Right.
So we could move. I think we could move. We just might have to have another meeting.
Okay, that's fine. So let's plan on that, and I'll write them an email. So we'll do 3/1 as a normal meeting with this feedback from the school committee.
Yes.
And then the budget hearing, we can even make that like a 30 to 45 minute meeting at another date. And I'll put that in the email to.
And I'm trying to remember, Ken, was there a time when we had the budget hearing on the same night as the budget vote? Did we ever do that? No. Okay. For some reason, there was a time when we had two things that happened on the same night, and I can't remember. It was years ago. But if it wasn't that, then that's fine. I don't know whether or not there's a time frame for the budget hearing as well.
I was just about to start looking for that. You might want to be sure because there could be
Yeah.
something in chapter 70 that says they have to have 10 days after the hearing to submit comment or whatever. So
Exactly. So that's so what I'll do, Megan, I'll have a broader conversation with Rebecca about that tomorrow.
Perfect. And just let me know.
Yep.
Okay, great. Without further ado, I would take a motion to adjourn at this point.
So moved.
Is there a second?
second.
It's been moved and seconded, so we'll do roll call vote. Member Brown?
Brown, yes.
Member Mills?
Mills, yes.
Member Smith?
Smith,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Sorry.
Member Dennis, please.
Dennis, yes.
All right, thank you guys so much. Have a great evening. Thank you for a wonderful meeting.
Who
Thank you.
seconded it? Sorry.
I did.
All right, thank you.
Christina, thank you. Ken,
You're welcome.
you guys can rock, paper, scissors it out for our next meeting.
Bye. Thanks.